Good morning, Jason. How are you today?
Good morning, Sam. It's a good day. It's sunny in Melbourne, which is rare, so who couldn't be happy?
That is so true, isn't it? And how weather affects our mood too. That's the brilliance of it, hey?
Yeah.
Listen, thank
Yes.
you so much for joining us today on our podcast. So thrilled to have you, and also a massive congratulations on your book, Unlikely.
Thank
Um,
you.
that has hit the market, and I can say firsthand, I would recommend it to pretty much everyone. Everyone, I say. I
Wow.
I was thoroughly entertained. It's intelligent. It's your story. It's funny. It's engaging.
Good. Good. Oh, I'm glad you've enjoyed it.
I
Yeah.
absolutely have. I
Yeah. And you,
absolutely
you
have.
never know when you write. I mean, it's one thing to write a book, but it's another thing to write your story in a book.
Yeah.
And so there is a nervous moment just as you release it to the wild, and you don't know what people's reactions are going to be, and you can't pull it back. Once it's out there, it's gone. So I'm glad you've enjoyed it.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I was really hoping to. I kind of thought, although I haven't finished it, I just want to say that, as I was, saying earlier, that I'm only at like 173 pages, and I remember that because I wanted to continue from there, so I left it there, and I was like, all right. But yeah, a 9 month old, you know, didn't quite. It wasn't quite planned that he would get so.
Well, you could read the book to your 9 month old. I'm sure it'd send him off to sleep straight away.
I'm sure that won't be the case. Yeah, the lessons of wisdom while reading that book, and I'm like, that I actually believe that there are two kinds of smarts. There's book smart and there is street smart, and you are a good mix of both. You just
Mm.
know. So my question then
And
is that you always talk about conviction, and I think, doing my journey so far and what I've learned about myself is conviction comes with confidence and clear headedness. Where did that come from for you in childhood?
mm. Yeah, it's interesting because about being smart, I think I'm smart enough to know that I'm not smart. And so there is, smart is a continuum, Sam. And I think I know enough to know what I know and what I don't know. I know enough to know what I'm good at and what I'm not good at. And comparison is an ugly game. The moment you start comparing yourself to others,
Interesting.
you're always going to lose because you're always going to find somebody in an area, an attribute that you're aspiring to who has gone further and faster. And
Mm,
so the comparative game is very dangerous. And I think when you start taking that perspective on the world around you, you very quickly don't feel smart. So there's a source of why sometimes I refer to myself as the unlikely entrepreneur, because the moment I ever looked up and around and tried to compare notes with everybody, I realized, gee, I shouldn't be the guy in this role, in this seat, carrying these responsibilities. But you asked me about conviction, and I think that is a big differentiator. It's not intelligence or commerciality. It's not that brilliance that we might sometimes recognize in the great game changers of the world around us. But conviction, I think, is a superpower. It does actually have the ability to shift you in ways and compel you into spaces that you don't feel qualified. And I don't think I get my conviction from my confidence. I think it's the other way around. I get my confidence from my conviction. And conviction is this belief, it is a transformative idea. It is more than a vision. It is
hmm.
this compulsion that you were born to do certain things, that there
Yeah,
is
right.
I believe strongly that God commissions us or mandates us to do things. And once you form a strong understanding or clarity of what that is, that forms this rocket fuel that can take you into outer space. And your confidence comes from that. So actually, if I think about it, my confidence is not in me. My confidence is in the conviction that I am living on purpose. That's really where my smarts comes from, I think.
The reason I also asked you that question because we've got a 7-year-old who I think, and I'm not saying because I'm his mum, but he's really smart. Like he knows to ask the right questions, I guess. That's an art as well, I think, in itself. And I just, when I read your book, I thought you were so clear-headed, even at that young age. Thinking about all that at the age of 10 when you saw the World Vision ad and, going through that. And hence that question that did your parents say some things to you that would maybe propel you to have that conviction and confidence eventually? And I think it's about parenting a bit as well, isn't it? In many ways.
Well,
What's
we
that?
certainly, yeah, we certainly don't grow up in a vacuum. So we are a product of our childhood environment, our family home, the other key influences in our lives in those formative years. I can't remember who is famed for saying it, but there is an axiom that says, give us a child till the age of 7, and we will be able to tell you what sort of man or woman they will grow up to be, because as the concrete is setting in those early years, and at least that
Absolutely.
first decade, there are such fundamental building blocks put in place. And it's interesting. I actually met up with someone today who said to me, who has also just finished reading the book, and they said, "Wow, I can't believe how much you remember of your childhood." And I've journaled for a lot of my life. I've kept, reflections, maybe not as young as 10, but certainly as young as 15. And
Mm,
I've kept all those. And of course, that helps my recollection of what was going on in me and around me during those
mm,
first 2 decades of life. And I mean, I have to obviously give my parents an enormous amount of credit for loving me and providing safety and giving me a sense of identity and some confidence. But I think I still had an extraordinary experience at 10 years of age, and I can't put all the words around it. I certainly didn't do anything to deserve it. I count myself really fortunate that my little heart and my little brain somehow recognized the significance of that moment when I was such a young boy. I mean, I've raised 4 children, Sam, and they're all now past the age of 10. And when I saw them all turn 10, it did dawn on me that that was the age that I had a little awakening
mm.
spiritual world and to the bigger circles that are turning around me. And I did have a sense of who I wanted to become and what I wanted to do, which I don't think is ordinary. And it's not because I am anything special. I think it happened to me.
Mm.
The best bit I did was recognize it and internalize it and hold on to it and not let the circumstances of my teenage years dilute that or dissuade me from that. So I think if there's anything I'm grateful for, what I did in was to just recognize the profundity of that moment. But the moment itself, that and it's one of my most defining moments in life. And it happened when I should have been just riding skateboards and playing computer games. But it totally rewired my inner world. It made me want to chase something
Yeah, give
that,
you the path. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Mm.
And I feel very fortunate for that.
It's
Yeah.
amazing. Jace, from that, my next question then. You have described your journey as both exhilarating and exhausting. If you could go back to the day you started your clinic in your garage
Hmm.
and whisper one piece of advice to yourself, knowing all that's unfolded and happened so far, what would it be and why do you think that would be?
Wow, that's a big question
It is a
because
big question.
because like all the movies we watch with time travel in it, the big cautionary tale is if you
Yeah.
go back and you shift one little thing, as much as a conversation with one individual, or whether you take that girl to the prom dance or you don't, like in Back to the Future, like, those sliding doors moments, you change one thing and it can reset the trajectory of everything that
Mm,
followed, right? So I'm actually nervous about these sorts of questions, Sam, because I know what you're looking for. You're wanting to know where I would want to redo or a do-over, and how I might try and prevent something that happened, because as you get into the rest of the book, it gets ugly. It doesn't get it's not an easy ride.
you've had a tough journey. Yeah. Yep.
And
Of course.
and but the spirit of the question is, what would I tell my younger self at that point? Uh, I think I would encourage the young Jason who's just launched his practice to breathe easy
Okay.
and not be in a hurry. That it isn't a race.
Mm,
That whilst healthy things grow, and I do believe that, I believe healthy families grow, I believe healthy relationships grow, healthy investments grow, healthy businesses grow. I mean, healthy plants and healthy babies grow, right? So healthy things will grow. And so it's not an anti-growth sentiment, but I think I would say just pace yourself. Don't suffer from urgency sickness, which I think I did. I suffered this hurriedness, this sense that time was running out, that I wasn't good enough. So if I didn't get it done quickly, I'm going to exhaust, I'm going to burn out, I'm going to wash out. And so I felt like at some point somebody's going to find me out, Sam. I'm an imposter. I'm not the guy. I'm not going to make it till the end. So I need to build this as big as I can and go as far as I can to sort of validate myself, to
mm,
get as many runs on the board, to hoodwink the world around me that I'm capable, to try and build followership, to try and attract and recruit staff, because I'm so young and I'm so naive and I'm
mm,
so undeveloped in my leadership and my commercial instincts. I felt in a hurry. And I think looking back, my speed created lots of missteps. Now, of course, I learnt from those, but nonetheless, if I was coaching the young Jason, I'd say, "Hey, buddy, just take a breath, listen a bit more to Paulina, pace yourself, breathe easy. Yes, accept growth is part of your story, but it doesn't have to be at a breakneck pace. Don't put your health at risk. Don't put your core relationships at risk. Value people along the way. Don't be as task focused. Pace yourself. Relax. Just take
mm.
20% off the top,
With
and
you.
enjoy a slightly more steady climb than an ascent that requires ropes and safety nets all the time.
Then that leads me to my next question, and more an observation that I thought I might talk to you about in the podcast. When you talk about the hurriedness, right? That there was this thing in me, and thinking that there's an imposter in there. Now, you could have had a physiotherapy business in a suburb which could have done amazingly well. You have great people skills, and you had a great team with you. Um, why the need to franchise it? And at what point did that thought come to you that
Mm,
I want to go bigger, harder, faster?
yeah. I don't even credit myself with the thought, Sam. Um, early in the journey of having launched a single practice, I remember a banker from the ANZ giving me a brochure on franchising. And I don't know what inspired him to do this. It was probably just a whole bunch of paraphernalia and propaganda that he gave me that day.
Mm,
It was a 10-page brochure on franchising. And it went through all the regulations and code requirements of meeting compliance with the very strict and stringent regulations. And I can remember reading it and thinking, wow, that answers that question. I'll definitely never franchise. It was such an onerous, high bar. I disqualified myself from that opportunity immediately. And in fact, funny story, I remember reading it in bed late one night,
mm,
and Paulina had already turned out her light and rolled over to go to sleep. And I remember getting to the end of it and audibly saying, well, I'll never do that, and flicking the brochure, not in anger, but just almost resignation, flicking the
Yep.
brochure onto the floor, ready to turn out, and it hit the wall and it made a bang. And Paulina turned over because I woke her and she said, "Is everything okay? What's wrong?" And I said, "Oh, yeah, no problems. Just go back to sleep. I've just decided I'll never franchise."
Mm.
Ha ha ha. And I believed it. And years ticked along, and we still just had this one single practice because I spent 5 years with Paulina building our first location, really thinking it was our
Yeah.
only location
Yeah. Right.
because I
Okay.
wasn't at this point planning to stay in business. This was just a means to some income until we could travel overseas into the developing world and work as medical missionary.
Mm.
And I eventually wound myself up into such a tight spot. I was really borderline burnout at 26 years of age. And I call it my quarter life crisis. Like, I was just so unhappy with being trapped in suburbia, in small business, in debt, feeling like this business was ruling my life, that I ran away. I bought a combi van. I shaved my head. I said to Paulina, let's go. And we spent 3 months driving around Australia while the business at home was under management with some staff. And I thought the business would fail at that point, and I didn't mind. Like, then I could blame everybody else, Sam, and I would be released from the pressures and obligations of running this thing. And it was on that trip around Australia that I felt like I had my second really defining moment. Like you touched on, as a 10-year-old, I felt like I had a God encounter. I felt like I had another one at 26. And I was complaining to God saying, you want people overseas looked after, like there's poor and needy communities, and I thought we could help and do something. Why aren't you letting us go? It was a real criticism, actually, of God. I was appealing to his common sense. And he said to
Mm.
me, well, you could go, but there's only two of you that are going. And so, what sort of difference do two people make on the other side of the world? He said, if you stay home in Australia and you learn the business of physiotherapy and you scale it nationally and you build 100 locations, and it's a noble, ethical business model that generates cash on scale, then you could send more than two people. You could send 100, maybe 1,000. Now you can have profound impact. And it totally changed my whole perspective on the opportunity in front of me. All of a sudden, I was like switched on, engaged, ready to give everything for the business because I saw the purposefulness in how it might reach the mission of impacting other people's lives. And
Mm.
almost immediately, Sam, I realised I have to go back to franchising. Because how am I ever going to fund 100 locations around Australia? When you think of
Mm.
franchising, it's a partnership model, right? So you're using shared capital of all of the franchisees to build the brand. You're going into a form of literal partnership, and you're going to build this network together. And so driving home from Australia, I'm like, okay, better learn. I better find that brochure from the bank on franchising because we're going to have to scale this thing. And that was what I came home and set about to do. So that's the origin story of franchising in our business.
Very interesting. And do you think that you, at that point when you came back from that trip, you were ready to take that on? Because, somebody's got to be like franchising would require a bit of drive,
Wow.
as well. You've got to be ready to take on the challenges it's going to pose with that business
Sam,
model as well.
Sam, you,
Or
you could
scaling.
you could ask me that question of just about every milestone in our business. Jace, did you think you were ready? Do you think you were ready to launch in the garage? No. Do you think you were ready to move into medical premises? No. Do you think you were ready to franchise? No. Do you
Yeah.
think, and every iteration of growth and maturity within our business, because a business is a life cycle like a human, right? There's the
Yeah,
baby,
absolutely.
the toddler, there's the preschooler, there's the preteen, there's the adolescence, And, eventually you get into some level of adulthood and maturity, only to probably die out and the generational cycle to repeat as you spawn
Mm.
off other brands and commercial opportunities. So there's a life cycle in business, and at every age and stage of back in motion, I felt completely ill-equipped, out of depth, unprepared, and hence the title of the book is unlikely. It wasn't just unlikely at the beginning, it was unlikely right to the very end. And so I had really no idea of how to franchise, none whatsoever. All I had at that point was a conviction. And this is why your first comments are really poignant, because I had a conviction, and it's the conviction that gave me the confidence. Not
Mm.
because I knew, but because I knew that I can't not try.
Yeah,
So
with
I
you,
would do
which
everything.
is very powerful.
I spent
Mm.
a year just having coffees and breakfasts and talking, interviewing every patient who knew anything about business, other people in the church or the school community who had ever done anything with franchising. I read every book. I subscribed. I became a member of the Franchise Association. I did everything to learn. I was a sponge because I'm coming off an almost zero base in terms of knowledge or definitely experience. And so it was a really steep learning curve. But within a year, we had our second practice, which was our first franchise. And
Yeah,
so then
right.
you
Okay.
learn on the job, you learn by the school of hard knocks, and it was rough. There's no doubt about it.
Do you remember some of the challenges you went through at that initial phase before,
Oh,
getting having that first franchise?
well, the biggest challenge before having the first one was actually keeping staff, because we're a services
Mm.
business, and you're in accounting. You've probably worked in professional services for most of your career, and really we don't have a product per se. Our
Yeah.
service is goodwill, based on the expertise that we bring our client or our patient. Think of them as a customer. They're not buying a commoditized product. It's not like a pair of sneakers or a hamburger cooked to a recipe. Every single patient that came in, even if they all presented with headaches or low back pain, they needed an individual assessment, a differential diagnosis. They got a tailored treatment plan, and that relied on clinical judgment. And so you can't cookie cut a procedure around that. You can put guidelines and principles, but you can't mandate the same treatment for every patient. There's just too many moving parts and variables. And so when I think about the earliest challenge to franchising, it was, how do I keep staff, or how do I train and quality control the service delivery within our staff? Because if
Mm.
I can't do that, there is absolutely no use reproducing our brand across multiple locations if the patient experience everywhere they go is different, if it's variable, and if I can't control it. And so this is a massive issue in not just physiotherapy and healthcare, but professional services generally.
Yeah.
And that's why people would say to me, this is an unfranchisable concept. It can't be done. Um, don't try. Like it's going to fail.
Oh, is
And
that where you got the reservations initially before going into the franchise model?
absolutely, yeah, we
All
used to
right.
we
Wow.
used to call it the dirty F word, Sam. Because the moment I would mention franchising to anyone in my industry, to any lawyers, to any professional advisors, their first reaction was, wow, really? No, Jace, the reason nobody else has
Oh, wow.
franchised it before
Yeah.
you is because it can't be done. Franchising is not built for this sort of business model. And so we had to adapt, we had to innovate, we had to cut and paste the best bits from retail franchising and the best bits from professional services firms, and we had to essentially bespoke our own model. And even to find a lawyer who was prepared to draw up the contracts to represent the terms I wanted to offer was difficult because they were unconventional. They were non-conformative to the intelligentsia of the day, and not to spoil what happens in the second half of the book, but there is a really major event in the last 5 years of our business journey where we end up in a parliamentary inquiry. We end up being audited for 5 consecutive years by the ACCC because they can't get their heads around the uniqueness of our business model, because we are trying
Mm,
to quality control something that is an intangible asset. Intellectual property and goodwill are very difficult, um, very difficult elements of the business model to put clarity and restraints around in such a way to protect the brand and to protect the patient experience. But
mm.
that's what we tried to do. And so, your question was, what were some of the early challenges before we even franchised? Well, it was to try and even work out how to franchise this thing, because I had nothing to franchise. I'm sort of franchising thin air and intentionality, but it would have been a whole lot easier if I had 11 herbs and spices wrapped around a piece of chicken, like Colonel Sanders did, because at least I could trademark that and I could train people in a repetitive procedure. So this was our
Mm.
first and most difficult element, which means it was hard to retain staff, which means if I don't have staff, I don't have scale. And on the cycle, repeated, rinse and repeat for many, many years.
So people obviously, like you said, quality control and that people would have been a challenge throughout not just the early stages, but throughout the business, as you were growing back in motion. Now, how did you then what were your solutions that you
Yeah.
put in place?
So we had to crack the code. We had to find a way to protect the business and the brand, but also give the right balance of what we call clinical sovereignty to the practitioners in all the locations. So they could still make their own judgments on the patient procedures that they needed to execute in front of them, but within very clear, evidence-based research protocols that got best outcomes, really. So in the end, we franchised the system of healthcare. So I built our own intellectual properties into an automated software platform, and I think that was a really important enabler of growth. And other than the patient interaction, almost everything else, everything that happened in the practice was automated in business and administrative systems that we controlled, that we administrated on their behalf. And so that's everything from marketing, HR, financial controls, all their professional development, all of the business systems that the practice relied on. We were able to systemize that and franchise that. And then when it came to the clinical service delivery, what I did was I developed a patent around, or a trademark around, a clinical approach that we call results for life, which was taking every patient through a pathway, a tailored roadmap of their own health condition. And so we were able to build
Right.
intellectual protection around all of that, which became part of the franchisable model. And thirdly, finally, the client database. The actual patient list was regarded as an intellectual property of the brand. So
Hmm.
we controlled that through coded software. Every patient who went through any one of our practices anywhere, whilst they owned their medical information, we had legal restraint around what could be done with that client list, which meant a franchisee couldn't go rogue and exploit that patient list for personal
Right.
opportunity.
Yeah.
And it also meant that if they left the group, they left the patient list behind. And so that's a pretty powerful asset to use to get compliance of behaviours to help us quality control performance in an otherwise fluid environment. So hopefully that's not too complicated for your listeners, but really they were the three things that we built our franchise system around.
No, not at all. Yeah,
Yeah.
no, awesome. Do you think you would change anything in how you ran the business? Would you change anything in the model itself
Yeah.
from a perspective of control or the brand?
Look, fundamentally, I think we built the right model. I can't. There are very few superior alternatives that were available to me at the time in terms of what the law would provide, in terms of what technology would enable, and even culturally, socially, within our profession at the time, we were considered pretty maverick. We were sort of bending reality and definitely swimming upstream and causing controversy. And so, if I'd gone any more radical than what I did, the house of cards would have imploded. It would have fallen, and we probably wouldn't have got out of the gate. So, I think for the time, culturally and technologically, and regulatory environments provided, we probably optimized our our situation. But when I sit here today and I think about what I might do moving forwards, I mean, there is a heap of things that I would love to innovate or be creative around, or our environment just offers new opportunity for. And so that's at a macro level. At a micro level, Sam, I did 100 things wrong, 100 things a day before morning tea. Um, and I overspent on software. I put the wrong payroll structure in place initially. I was very scarce in my thinking when it came to how to deal with competitors and the industry at large, and probably wished I was more generous and open-handed in the earlier years, and not as controversial or as provocative in some of my statements. There was just naivety and youthfulness and energy, in a sense that I was up against the pack, up against the majority, and so I just needed to fight my way through. I think I could have been a
Mm,
lot more conciliatory and a lot more relational, but I don't really lie in bed beating myself up over it, because I think
yeah.
for the most part I found the right balance, and it's only in the exceptions where I've tipped the scale one way too far and it's hurt and there's been consequences and I've had to recover it. But I guess that's how you learn your limits. You learn where the edge is sometimes by dangling your toes over it
Mm,
and feeling the rush of the wind and the almost fall, the near miss, and then you're like, okay, so that's where the edge is. I can just walk it back a half meter and I can still be in the distinct minority doing things differently, but maybe not with the same risk exposure. But it seems to be that uh, maybe you've got to get to that edge more than once to work out exactly where it is, and you build a tolerance for it. There's no doubt about it. So slowly, after 22 years, I just built a thick skin and some endurance for the hardship. And because it was working, we were getting great results, and enough people loved now what we were doing. It fueled me to just keep going, because
yeah,
you can't please everybody, right?
of course. Yeah, and
You
that's
sort of
hard.
accept that. You accept that
Yeah.
somewhere in the journey, despite all the mistakes you make, you accept, well, the mistakes are part of the learning.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's so important, that message that you just said. You
Mm,
can't please everyone.
mm,
And I mean, talking about, like, from friends' perspective as well, who are willing to get their idea or the dream, make it into a reality, and sort of give it the wings that it deserves. I know there is a lot of fear that happens, and I'm sure a lot of listeners who are listening to our podcast would think the same. It's and it's sometimes imposter syndrome. Fear just comes in many ways, many ways. What do you think that person can focus on to put that fear aside? If they have a dream, if they have an idea, they want to get it, from ground up.
yeah. Look, I think a really helpful mental exercise when you feel fear, which is something I regularly have to contend with, even now, in all contexts, right? Fear doesn't dissipate. People think those who take risks, or who have dared greatly and achieved something substantive, that there's no fear. That's a total misnomer. And if you read my book, you're going to hopefully hear that it's like constantly plagued with fears and anxieties and worries as I navigate this treacherous adventure. So I would say when I face fear, number one is to accept that courage is not the absence of fear;
Mm.
it's the willingness to proceed despite it. So real courage isn't that you're fearless. There used to be a brand called Fearless, a clothing brand, and I didn't like it because actually it's not about being fearless.
Fearless.
It's
Yeah.
about
Yeah.
being courageous, which says I'm going to do it
Yep.
even though I'm scared.
Yep.
So that would be the first thing. But the second thing is to the mental exercise I go through is how comfortable am I with the alternative? So when I'm afraid to do something, when I feel this conviction, this compulsion, and it's high risk and it generates fear and the scare in me is huge, I'm like, it makes you want to walk it back. But then I ask myself, but how comfortable am I with the alternative? The alternative is I don't try, I don't go as far, I don't do the thing that I feel convicted around, which means I'm going to live with regret or disappointment or a sense of having gone only halfway, given not my best. I'm going to watch other people have a go and I'm going to
Mm.
have FOMO watching them. And there's no guarantee what I'm about to do will work,
Mm.
but I'd rather try and fail than never try. And so when I'm feeling the fear, I literally say to myself, okay, well, let's play out what plan B looks like. Plan B looks like because of my fear, I don't try. I don't give it a go. I sit and watch everybody else do it. Am I okay with
Mm.
that? Now, if it's bungee jumping, Sam, 2 weeks after my knee reconstruction, then I'm probably happy to sit it out and watch somebody else have a go. So the
Yep.
fear is healthy in that instance.
Yep. Yep.
But how many times are you going to play the plan B alternative and be okay with it before you realize maybe I just need to accept fear is part of the journey? Fear is part of the necessary preparation, and fear does something to us physiologically and it does something to us psychosocially. And I think it does
Mm.
something to us in the inner world in terms of our spiritual disposition, and we face down all those fears and we go anyway. So if that helps people,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, I'd be
Absolutely.
saying, hey, if you're afraid, you are normal. That
Yep.
is a healthy approach, and then it's what you do with your fear.
So embrace the fear.
I think so, yeah. Embrace the
Yeah.
risk, embrace the tension, embrace the pain, embrace the uncertainty
Yeah.
on a considered, calculated basis. Because then when it predictably gets hard and you do have problems and maybe fail first, second, and third time, it's not, oh, I should never have done this. The fear was wisdom speaking. No, 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 no. You should have done it. This is the necessary
Mm.
path because you calculated that the alternative would be to never try and just watch, and you weren't okay with that. So it helps
Mm.
me rationalize going again and again and again until we get through because I've decided this path. It hasn't
Yeah.
happened to me against my will. I have actually opted in. And there's
Mm.
something powerful when you opt in to your own failure. It doesn't feel like failure. It feels like you just haven't got there yet.
Learning. Yeah. Yeah. Right. Interesting.
And you don't feel the
So,
victim. You don't feel the victim. It hasn't happened to me. I can't blame my circumstances. I can't blame what everybody else has done. I chose the hard path. So I'm here on purpose. I think that's powerful.
and that is super powerful. And probably a question that just came to my head was, what if I am in the wrong direction? How do I know that? So what I'm trying to say is, I guess, I've overcome fear. What if I think that that's not the purpose I thought initially is not actually supposed to be, and I may
Yeah.
be on the wrong path? How do I then course correct? What is my signal, or what should I be thinking to course
Yeah.
correct?
Well, there's two different questions I hear in that. One is, how do I know I'm on the wrong path? And two, how do I course correct?
Yes.
Um, because the second is much easier when you can resolve the first. The second will send you around the bend if you're not sure of the answer to the first question. So, how do you know you're even on the right path?
Mm,
I think that's a powerful question that we don't talk about enough,
mm,
but it does come back to convictions. It actually does come back to what are those core beliefs that you have chosen to build your life on. It comes back to the centrality of your identity. So it is not good enough to just run a business because there's a market opportunity. It's not
mm.
good enough to do something just because you're good at it. It's not good enough to do it because your family, your friends, your husband, your wife, somebody has said that this is their expectation of you. None of those are good reasons. I think that the reason you would persist in hardship, the reason you would overcome these fears, that you would trudge knee deep through snow years and years and years, is because you have a personal conviction that this is what you're meant to do. This is truth being revealed in and through you to the world around you. And so if you're vague on that, I mean, Simon
Mm,
Sinek calls it the power of why.
yeah,
But I
yeah.
think it's deeper than that. It's deeper than just having a reason. It's actually in your DNA. It's soul, right? And I think if you're vague on that, if you're confused on that, you have work to do. And it's not a bad thing. Like there's no judgment in this. It's not a criticism. I feel like I have
Mm,
this at least every year, and center myself again on what are those convictions that drive me, because I end up on the wrong path, heading in the opposite direction, chasing things that are great opportunities, but they're actually not core to my identity and
yep.
my convictions. Then I need to recognize that quickly. Sometimes Paulina recognizes it and she calls me out. Sometimes, mentors to whom I've made myself accountable can recognize it and help me identify it. But there is no substitute for your inner conscience and your inner person detecting a disconnect between what you're doing and who you are. So that would be my few comments just to your first question. How do you know you're on the wrong path? I think there
Mm,
would be a sense of violation internally, a sense of non-congruence. You just don't align. This isn't the stuff that lights you up, that gives you joy, that makes you feel like you're living on purpose. And so you should ask hard questions of yourself, even if it's a lucrative commercial opportunity. Get out before you are, it's like quicksand. You're
burnt
going to
out.
sink
Yeah.
in that thing. And then the second question is, well, once you think you're on the wrong path, how do you course correct? Well, I mean that's a long conversation too. But if I was just to give a few thoughts, you have to come back to some of those profound questions of who you are, of where you want to go, and you have to allow the ideas to incubate. And I would do that in the safety of two or three people who know you well, who trust you. And then I'd start making hard decisions. I'd be
Mm,
learning the power of no. I'd be starting to excuse myself from the commitments and obligations I've made. And that might mean selling businesses or resigning jobs or relocating where you live, saying no to some relationships that aren't positive and healthy in your world. But they're all
wow.
course
Yep.
corrections.
Yep. 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 Yep.
And then I would welcome some very rigorous accountability in my life around the things that you want to now make a priority, so that externally you have restraints until you develop the internal fortitude to be able to carry it forward. So, I don't want any of that to sound like psychobabble. It's not. I actually think this is very pragmatic. We only get one life, right?
Oh,
One life to
absolutely.
live in the way we
No, you're
know.
right.
And we
You are
wouldn't build
absolutely
a
right.
house without blueprints. We wouldn't go on an aeroplane without knowing an itinerary. We wouldn't start a course at university without having looked at the syllabus and thinking about the career that follows from it. And yet we live our lives haphazardly, like just following the paths of least resistance wherever the opportunity presents. I reckon the opportunity of a lifetime happens at least once a day. Problem is, we don't know what we're looking for, we miss it, or worse still, we take the wrong one, and our lives end up on a completely different trajectory by only a few degrees every year. And we wake up one day and we're in our 40s or 50s and we don't like who we are or what we're doing. And we have those crises, those, transitional moments of this isn't who I thought I was going to become.
Which is very interesting you say that, because I think one of the core reasons why we wanted to dive into starting a podcast, we had no knowledge, just no prior planning. We just like, we either do it or we don't. It's just one of those things. The only question came is, can we balance it having the two kids
Yeah.
and having our jobs or what we do at the moment? And it's a struggle. It's a struggle at times, and that's why I wanted to, I guess, ask you that question, because I've been through that thinking of going, I want to give up. Maybe I don't want to do it anymore. I love it, but that's the thing, it sort of touches both of our souls.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's that always that, constant pulling and pushing and sort of seeing what can we do to make it work.
It's meant to be a struggle, Sam.
Which is very interesting, isn't it? It's embracing what you're saying. It's embracing that struggle.
Yeah, and you want it to be a struggle, but not overwhelming.
Yes.
This is all about proportionality in life, and I think tension. There will. I don't think there needs to be. It's not like I want you to struggle. It's not like
Yeah.
I'm hoping it's a struggle. I think
Yeah.
it's just an acceptance that the things that really matter, the stuff that you feel compelled to do, are going to cost you. There's a tax. There's a tax to pay. You're an accountant. There's a tax to pay. You want to earn big, you got to pay the piper, and that comes in the form of sacrifices. And if it was all easy, if it was all accessible, if it kind of just happened organically, then of course we hear this. People say this all the time. Then everybody would be doing it, right? So what are the things that differentiate us from each other? And it's not a hierarchy of better or worse. It's just what are the things that make us distinctive? And the things that make you unique, the contributions you bring to the world are going to be sometimes the things that only you can bring, which means it's a little lonely. There's a solitary path. Nobody's quite walked this journey before, which means you're trailblazing. You're discovering things that nobody else can teach you. Only experience will teach you, and that creates a bit of struggle. And the struggle is okay, as long as you're not burning out, as long as you're not extending beyond your physical, spiritual, and emotional health, as long as your husband and your children are still getting the best bits of you, then I think there's room in the periphery for the struggle. And it's in the struggle that you will develop, you'll learn, you'll grow, and you will bring a distinctive mark on the world. My gentle encouragement would be, don't struggle in every area all at the same time.
Oh, yeah.
Right? So
That's very wise.
So you have to create some latitude for struggle, and what buys you that latitude is a bit of safety and a bit of normality and a bit of rhythm and a bit of ease in other areas of your life. So let's face it, if parenting two young kids, running a career as an accountant, trying to have a vibrant marriage, trying to be connected to the local community, and I'm just going to make stuff up, trying to build a house, trying to coach the local football or netball team, and do a podcast that you've never done before, all while you're, just to be totally exaggerating here, all while you are launching your own nutritional products brand, and you're suffering chronic fatigue. I mean, that just sounds stupid.
It's not going to work.
Now you've overwhelmed yourself in every possible area. But if home's pretty steady and career's going well, you can afford to struggle in one or two new and different spaces. It's just
very
it's
interesting.
about proportionality.
It's a great point. Great point. Thank you for sharing that. yeah, with us. Um, my next question for you, Jace, did you ever felt during this journey on building $100 million brand, did you ever question your faith at any stage, or were you not aligned with it in the way you thought you would be? Were there any
Yeah,
instances did that ever happen?
yeah. My faith is very important to me.
Yes,
It's kind of like, I'm a physio, so I think in skeletal terms. We have a backbone, we have a vertebral column, our spinal
yeah.
column, and then the whole body in terms of its mechanics and its muscular system, the way we move is central to this chassis that God has designed us with. And I think in the
Mm,
same way, in my inner world, like as in my spiritual self, I think I have a core central structure, and it provides my stability, and it's a whole set of beliefs and disciplines. And then I have all of my extremities coming off it. And I think, to answer your question, I don't think my central spiritual core was ever at huge risk.
right.
It was tested, it was pushed beyond, well, it was pushed to its limits, but I don't think it ever broke. I don't think I ever collapsed like a jellyfish spiritually without a spinal cord. I think I always had some clarity and some cohesive convictions around my core spiritual beliefs. To be fair, I would say that's what actually carried me through. That's why I endured. And if I had lost that halfway, it would have been tragic, because not only would have I lost the most important part of myself, but I think it would have also compromised my ability to continue in the business or commercial world. So I'm very grateful I didn't lose or even question the core spiritual truths that make up my faith at any time, even though I had good reasons to, plenty of time.
Mm-hmm.
But the way I would describe it, Sam, is I definitely ebbed and flowed and shape shifted in the way I lived out those core beliefs. And I think I got it wrong as much as I got it right. I think I violated a lot of my beliefs. I think I needed lots of times to come back, almost at the mercy of God, and ask for forgiveness for poor choices and bad decisions and terrible judgments. And I had to forgive people. And like, I tell a lot of those stories in the book. It's a pretty honest account, and I think they're good examples of not having lost my faith, but having confused myself on how to live out my faith. And I needed good people around me, my wife and mentors, to really
Mm,
guide me through some of those stages, all of which were formative. Like, they were very important experiences. And even now, I look back and I think, wow, I'm the beneficiary of lessons, of insights into how I live and work, because of some of those terrible circumstances where I didn't follow all of the faith virtues that I knew I should have and believed in, but didn't have the discipline to follow. And it kind of
mm.
encourages me second, third, fourth time round now, as I live in other contexts and do other projects, how I can bring all those learnings forward.
Very interesting. Yeah,
Mm.
it's. No, thank you for sharing. Um, how do you and Paulina balance, life and your guys' drive and quest for learning, faith? How does? Sorry, it is a big question.
It's a big question. I laugh because it's a recurring question. I get asked this a lot whenever I go and speak at
Uh,
places. I sort
yeah.
of I give my keynotes, and then one of the most predictable questions is, how do you balance it all? And I tend to give a quick, cryptic, but truthful answer. And it's, well, we do it badly. And um, and then there are times where we do it well. So,
Mm,
how do I balance everything with Paulina? Badly. Like, it's been a constant tension. for the
Yeah.
26 years, nearly 27 years we've been married. So I do it badly is kind of the short, quick first answer, just to make everyone realize I don't have, some silver bullet on this. And if Paulina was sitting here and you asked her the question, I want to get in before she answers, and I would say, yeah, he does it badly. But having said that, we've learnt lots of ways to improve
Yeah.
progressively on how we do that. So I'm not without answers. I just don't want to pretend that I'm the exemplar on this.
I get it. Yeah.
Pretty early in the piece, Sam, we realised that I had a really big on button and a very small off button, and we needed boundaries. So as soon as the business had moved out of the home and was into formal premises, Paulina and I would try and really be careful about not letting work seep back into the home. So that was
Mm,
something we set pretty early controls around. In terms of even what we talked about and just how we let it affect our mood, and we had to be very intentional. When we started having children, and like I've mentioned, we've raised 4 kids. Almost as soon as Lockie, our firstborn, came into the family, I was 28, the business was still very hungry for attention.
yeah.
But Paulina and I agreed that we were going to make our kids a priority, that we wanted to be better
Yeah.
husbands and wives to each other and parents to our children than we ever would be health professionals or entrepreneurs. So you don't get an award for being a great dad or a great mum, or, you know, emotionally and physically present parent in the home. You don't get an award for that. No, no, the media aren't going to knock on your door and write an article on you, but we thought that
Absolutely.
needs to be much more important to us than what we do in the business. And so I pretty well changed up my schedule as soon as the kids were born. I would be home for dinner. If I wasn't traveling, I would be home for dinner every night, and for about 2 or 3 hours as we kept having children, I was phone off, not working for, between say 5:30 and 8 p.m., and we would do dinner, we would do the baths, I'd read them stories, I'd be physically present, not always emotionally present, but I was physically present, and that really mattered. And then once the kids were in bed, Paulina understood the demands of the business were so incessant that
Mm,
I would continue to work from home, on the laptop, sometimes till 2 and 3 in the morning. In fact, it's not something I'm proud of, but for years I lived on 4 or 5 hours sleep for decades actually. But it wasn't at the cost of the family time. So that's kind of how we would balance that aspect. Another thing we did, just to give you a quick example, is Paulina and I would sit down at the beginning and the end of every week, and we would align our schedules and our diaries, and
oh,
we
that's
would go
awesome.
through day by day, literally, who's doing kid drop off, what meetings do I have in the evenings, how can I help on these tasks, and what can she do in the business that would help offset some workload there. And
Yeah.
we would agree on a plan on a week by week basis. And then we'd get together at the end of the week, we'd review what worked, what didn't, and we'd cast forward again. And we've been in the habit of doing that pretty well our whole married life. And that sounds anal and overly structured and lacking
No,
maybe
it's
the
actually
strong,
really good.
but I think for Paulina and me, that was a real saving grace. And we would do it on an annual basis too. So we'd put all of our school holidays and important kids' sporting events and birthdays in the calendar. And then my PA would manage my travel and other meeting commitments and obligations around the family events that we had pre programmed into the diary. We would take 1 or 2 days every January to do that before, my staff wreaked havoc on my schedule. And I think all those things were really good habits. It didn't take away from the tension in the moment, Sam.
Mm,
Every day, Paulina and I would still have to face each other, and we'd have to say, are you doing too much? Can you be home more? The kids need you. Like, and we'd have to make the micro adjustments in real time.
oh,
And there were winners
absolutely.
and losers in that all the time. And that's kind of the harsh reality. But I think because we had the disciplines at a macro level, we were able to protect the big rocks that mattered. And I don't think we've got any sage wisdom around it. I think we wrestled that right to the very end, but it was a good tension. It was a positive problem. It meant that Paulina didn't just hands off and let me go
Yes.
wholeheartedly in one direction, because that would have
Yeah.
been dangerous for me in the business and I would have disconnected
Mm,
family. And I didn't say to Paulina, well, you're high maintenance, you're hard work, you're always putting pressure on me to be home, because actually that was right. That was a positive tension. So it was always a problem, but I think a good problem, the right sort of problem to be addressing every day or every week. And if Paulina was here, she would be able to give you much better insights from her perspective into that. Um, but we find ourselves having this conversation a lot with, emerging entrepreneurs who are young marrieds or young parents trying to find that middle ground. I think it's something you can never get lazy about.
yeah, it's so interesting. You brought this point up, and thank you for being so elaborate with your response too, because I feel we are going through this. Both me and Bala, and there are days when it all works well. There are days when it doesn't.
Of course.
And I'm going to take that guidance from what you guys did and working through your schedules, because I think that's really a good way to kind of keep us both on our toes
Mm.
and not forget about what is important end of the
Yep.
day.
And different personalities will approach it differently. So
Yeah,
be
absolutely.
kind to yourselves, work with your own flow. But Paulina and I are a little bit more structured by nature.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
that was a really helpful approach for us.
yeah, yeah.
To the point, Sam,
Super.
where I would actually, if Paulina wanted to talk to me about a work-related thing or me, her, we would set appointments with each other in the calendar, because we didn't want to be on a nice walk in the evening around the block or out at the beach
Yeah, yeah.
and ambush each other with these topics. It was like, no, that's actually
It's not gonna work.
violating
Yeah,
our equilibrium. So if you want to talk to me about that, make a time in the calendar, and then I know that at 3 o'clock tomorrow we're going to talk about finance, and you're going to ask
yeah.
me how much money we can spend on the holiday. No problem. Yeah, money in that.
Very cool. Um, my last question before I let you go, Jace. Actually, two questions. Where are you at now? What's happening in your life? Are you working on another venture? Are you happy being a speaker and having an impact?
I'm doing a lot of things. So Back in Motion was an all-consuming adventure for 20-something years that we've now sold. That was an easy way to explain what I did. Now I'm sort of doing 10 different things, each about 10% of the time, making up the whole pie. So I'm sitting on a number of different boards, some commercial, some in healthcare, some not, some in Australia, some overseas, but they're really intellectually stimulating, and I think we're doing meaningful work through those
Awesome.
projects. We're doing a lot of philanthropy. We run our own foundation. We believe God gave us the business to fund supporting the poorest of the poor, and so a lot of our projects, which are time consuming and require energy and insights too. It's not just writing checks for dumb money. We want to be purposeful in how we give through our foundation. So Paulina and I are working on that together. We run a micro family office that's investing in different things, and so that requires a little bit of time. And when I'm not writing books and I'm not speaking at events, then I am doing a fair bit of mentoring of individuals, both mature and emerging leaders, just where I can serve their vision and support them in their journey. So it's a pretty diverse schedule, but it's good. Yeah.
Well, loving your impact, and I will also post. I'll put in the description about your book as well.
Thank
And
you.
now it's available on Amazon, and do you have a website as well
Yes.
that people
If
could
people
reach
want
out
to,
to you even
yeah,
for
if people
coaching?
want a discount, they can go to
Okay,
jasontsmith.com.au. They can buy it
awesome.
directly from me. If they want a Kindle or a print on demand version, they can go straight to Amazon or any of the other major online retailers. And if they're outside Australia, that would be the easiest way to go.
Yeah, no, awesome, awesome. I'll put that all info in the description. And I absolutely hope and I encourage everybody who this video or audio, whichever way listeners want to listen to this, it goes to that they read your book. It's exceptional.
Thank you, Sam. I appreciate that.
Thank you again for chatting to me today and sharing your wisdom. There are powerful messages in the whole interview, and I personally learned lots, and I hope our listeners do too today.
Great, Sam. Thanks for inviting me on your show.